Joji's music lands with a strange, quiet authority. It doesn't scream for attention. Instead, it pulls you close and makes you listen. That effect comes from a cluster of deliberate choices. A singular vocal identity, economy of arrangement, emotional clarity, and a consistent aesthetic that turns vulnerability into craft. Joji's origin story matters because it sets up a tension he spent his career resolving. He began as a comedian and provocateur online, a persona built around irony and excess. Transitioning from that world to earnest songwriting could have felt like a gimmick. Instead, Joji used his past as contrast. The shock value and notoriety gave him an audience, but he deliberately stripped the theatrics from his music. The result feels authentic because it's clearly a conscious shedding of a mask rather than an opportunistic pivot. That history also gives his music texture. You hear the knowledge of performance and irony in his phrasing, but he refuses to hide behind it. The music's sincerity wins because it's chosen and practiced, not accidental. Joji's voice is his biggest weapon and his signature. It's not a whole lot of technical flash. There are no jaw-dropping runs or operatic acrobatics, but that's precisely the point. His timbre is breathy, slightly hoarse, and fragile in a way that suggests someone who's speaking rather than performing. That creates intimacy. The listener feels like they're in the same room during a private confession. He uses subtle imperfections as expressive tools. A crack on the final syllable, a tremor at the edge of a phrase, a drawl held a fraction too long. All of that communicates emotion more effectively than polished virtuosity might. Vocally, Joji opts to inhabit a mood instead of showing off technique. One of the clearest production philosophies in Joji's music is less is more. His tracks often rely on spacious arrangement rather than a muted piano, a reverb-soaked guitar, a minimalist drum pattern, ambient pads that hover in the background. The silence or near silence is as important as anything playing. It gives his music and his voice room to breathe and gives the listener space to project. The restraint also amplifies moments that do swell. A synth chord, a layered harmony, a sudden vocal doubling so that they land with emotional weight. Producers working with Joji avoid density for its own sake. Instead, they contour the soundscape so that the arrangement follows the song's emotional arc. Joji's melodies are deceptively simple. They often settle into narrow pitch ranges and repeat motifs that feel familiar and earwormy, not because they're over the top catchy, but because they mimic the patterns of memory and longing. These melodies aren't designed to impress on the first listen. They reveal themselves through repetition and context. He favors falling melodic motions and unresolved cadences that leave you with a sense of wanting. That wanting part is crucial. It mirrors the lyrical desire in the songs and makes the emotional part sticky. When the melody resolves, it sometimes resolves in a way that feels bittersweet rather than victorious, which fits the tonal world he hangs his songs in. Joji's lyrics are economical. He doesn't layer dense imagery or use complex storytelling. Instead, he zeroes in on a few potent lines and repeats them until they reverberate. That repetition functions like a chant. The more you hear it, the more it becomes a felt truth rather than a clever phrase. The language mixes plain-spoken confession with rooms of metaphor. He'll pair a simple admission, I miss you, or I don't feel like myself, with an image or setting that deepens the feeling without overwhelming it. The result is lyrics that feel personal and relatable. They're not trying to dazzle you with poetic fireworks. They want to meet you where you already are. A lot of artists who trade in vulnerability risk lapsing into self-indulgence or melodrama. Joji avoids both by keeping the emotional temperature steady and specific. He doesn't aim for catharsis so much as recognition. The songs often angle toward small human moments of failure, longing, or quiet acceptance, rather than sweeping confessions of doom. That specificity, honest, tiny failures, awkward apologies, the dull ache of routine loneliness is what makes listeners believe him. He doesn't dramatize for effect. He describes with an almost clinical clarity the textures of sadness and desire. That restraint turns personal detail into universal emotion. Joji's music is part of a larger, consistent aesthetic. Muted colors, melancholy imagery, night drives, neon reflections, and intimate interiors. That aesthetic carries through his visuals and public persona, which reinforces the emotional content of the songs. When everything from the cover art to the music videos to the social media posts share the same visual and sonic language, the music gains a kind of world building that deepens immersion. Consistency matters because it invites repeated listening. Fans aren't just consuming individual tracks, they're entering a mood, a late night mental space that Joji curates. That kind of artistic coherence rewards engagement and makes each release feel like a continuation of a story. Joji doesn't just sit neatly in one genre. He borrows from lo-fi, R&B, trap, ambient, and singer-songwriter traditions. But this genre fluidity isn't scattershot, it's purposeful. He takes elements that best express the emotional core of a song, a trap hi-hat for tension, a reverb-heavy guitar for loneliness, an R&B vocal run for warmth, and stitches them together into something that sounds like him. This cross-genre approach keeps the music fresh without feeling trendy. Instead of chasing the next hot sound, Joji kneads different textures until they serve mood and meaning, which preserves both artistic identity and sonic interest. Joji occupies a space where mainstream pop's melodic sensibilities meet indie's appetite for nuance and atmosphere. He writes hooks that could fit radio, but arranges them with imperfections in space that resist pure pop gloss. That balance makes his music accessible, yet distinct. It can hit mass audiences while also satisfying listeners looking for depth. The songs are radio-friendly in their melodic logic, but intimate in their presentation. That duality expands his appeal. Casual listeners get memorable choruses. Deeper listeners find layers that reward repeated, focused listens. Joji's success taps into cultural timing. In an era where many listeners crave authenticity and emotional candidness, especially online, where performative emotions abound, Joji's quiet sincerity feels like relief. He offers vulnerability packaged as craft, which people trust more than raw oversharing. The aesthetic of late-night wistfulness also dovetails with broader movements in music and media that favors introspection and mood over maximalism. He doesn't offer solutions, only feeling, and that's often what listeners want, not advice but recognition. Joji's music acts as confirmation that someone else experiences the same small pains and unresolved longings. Joji's music is good because it's the product of deliberate limitation and consistent taste. His voice turns flaws into intimacy. His production uses space as an instrument. His melodies mimic memory, and his lyrics choose specificity over theatrics. He blends genres in service of mood rather than novelty, and he sustains a coherent aesthetic that makes every song feel like part of a fragile, ongoing conversation. The result is music that doesn't demand you pay attention loudly. It invites you to listen closely, and once you do, it stays with you.